Hello. How do you get from living wood like this to decayed wood like that? My name's Gary Kramer, and we're going to be talking about wood-destroying organisms. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Gary.
Dr. Dave Langston from the University of Arizona is going to help us identify some of these wood-destroying organisms. Dave, I know you're an entomologist with the University of Arizona, so I take it we're going to look at some insects and bugs today.
Yeah, we'll be looking at those. We'll also be looking at some different type of fungi.
Oh, good. All right. What are we going to take a look at, Dave?
Termites, number one. Those are an insect that causes quite a bit of damage to wood. The ones that are in your home, and they're also found in forest and desert areas around the country.
Okay.
We'll be looking at various species of beetles that infest wood. Also carpenter bees, carpenter ants. Mm-hmm. And then if we get enough time, we'll go ahead and look at some different types of fungi.
Okay, great. That sounds like a full plate.
Okay.
Where do you want to start?
Let's just start with termites.
Sounds good.
Termites are primitive insects. A lot of people confuse them with ants.
Yeah, I thought they sort of look like an ant.
Yeah, but they look like it, but they're not related to an ant at all. They're more closely related to cockroaches than any other insect. So they're really not an ant. Termites are found all over the U.S. They're widespread. There's probably 40 different species all across the U.S.
Do they eat wood? Do termites eat wood?
They sure do. They're found in locations from deserts all the way to high forested areas all across the U.S. and they feed on wood. They feed on the cellulose that's in the wood, so they actually eat cellulose.
So cellulose then is a part of the wood?
Right. Wood is made up of cellulose, lignocellulose, and lignin. And termites usually avoid the lignin.
Oh, Dave, then the termites eat that part of wood that's called cellulose.
That's right. They don't digest it like a lot of people think. They have protozoa in their digestive tract that digests it for them. Then they survive or live off the nutrients from the byproducts from that digestive process by the protozoa. So that's the way they actually can, so it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship.
Between the protozoa and the termite.
Right, and if they didn't have the protozoa, they could not eat wood and they could not digest cellulose. So that's how they live. And the other thing is they're not born with it. They don't hatch out of the egg with cellulose. They pass it on to each other within the colony. So that's one of the theories that keeps it a close-knit social structure, is because they all have to share the protozoa amongst each other, otherwise they would starve to death. There's a number of environmental factors that will influence the size of an individual termite colony. Some of those factors are things like humidity, temperature, soil moisture, soil types, also the number of different types of predators that are located around that individual colonies. That will influence the number of termites you have. Usually it takes a year or two before you have enough termites in a given colonies before they'll actually swarm.
What's a swarm, Dave?
Well, a swarm is typical with most all of your social insects. You know, social insects have a caste system. You have winged reproductives and workers and other individuals in it, which we'll talk about later.
Okay.
But the swarmers are actually winged reproductives, and all your social insects have this, and so they swarm at certain times of the year according to environmental factors as well.
What kind of environmental factors affect swarming?
Here again, temperature, humidity, those other things like that. More of climatic type circumstances will influence those. Wind has a lot to do with it. Influences the distance and directions of where the swarmers will go. So that's something else. Something else you might be interested in is that many times people are concerned about the swarmers as they land around their house or they come around a given area.
Right.
There's only about 2% of those swarmers ever survive to establish a new colony.
Oh, so most of them die out then?
Right. I think the statistics are somewhere like about one mated pair out of 1 million ever managed to survive to start a new colony.
So swarming is hazardous for your health?
Right. It could be, yeah.
Well, what kind of termites are there, Dave, and which ones are you going to describe?
Well, you know, we said earlier there's about 40 different species across the U.S. Here in Arizona, since that's where we are now, there's about 17 species that are found throughout the state. Of those 17, there's only 7 of them that are really considered to be economically important within the state here. Now you can divide those 7 up into general categories, and they would be found in the types, you could call them like that. The types of termites would be the subterranean termite, the drywood termite, and the dampwood termite. Now subterraneans, you could further divide those up and think about some of the other ones that are important not only in this state but in other states of the U.S. For instance, in Arizona here, we have a desert species of termite that's found out in a, of course, typical desert location, and so they don't really impact homes that much. But you go to other types of subterranean termites like Formosan, which is just kind of a new introduced termite to the U.S. It's found in Florida, certain places in Hawaii, and they're really concerned about finding it in California now.
Oh, is that
But
right?
that's a type of subterranean termite as well. But really, we're going to talk about subterraneans, dry woods, and damp woods.
Well, why don't you start with the subterraneans, Dave?
Okay, it makes sense because they have the largest colonies. Subterraneans start out with their name. They're called subterraneans because they nest in the ground.
Okay.
The female, she lays her eggs in the soil or on wood that's buried in the soil. So they must maintain soil contact. So that's the reason they're called subterranean. They're the largest colonies, they have the largest colony. There's more individuals in the subterranean colony than all the other two that we're going to be talking about later.
Well, how do you recognize subterranean termite damage?
Well, first of all, you look at it in two ways. Since they're called subterraneans, they're going to come up out of the ground, so they're making shelter tubes, usually out of mud. They'll put it up on the side of a house or side of a piece of wood. So they're a shelter tube. Also, if they're found in the house, if we're talking about shelter tubes, they're also constructed out of things like pieces of drywall and things of that nature. And they'll hang it down from the ceiling, or you find it on the wall. But one of the characteristics is you have shelter tubes that subterraneans construct.
So a shelter tube then it's actually a tube that the termite goes up in?
Right, and they construct that themselves so they can keep themselves from predators.
Okay.
You know, just a protection device is what it is. So they're not exposed to predators, also lack of humidity and things of that nature. The other thing is the way you can recognize damage is subterranean termites, when they feed on wood, you look at the damage or the galleries they form in the wood. The galleries are with the grain primarily. So they very seldom will feed across it. So you just look at the damage. If the galleries are run predominantly with the grain, then you know it's subterranean.
How do you control them?
I think the best way, since they are subterranean termites, what you need to do is keep them from contacting the wood. So you want to construct a barrier between the soil and the structure.
Okay.
And prevent them from getting to the wood, and that's usually the best way to take care of them.
What do these look like, Dave? Why don't you tell me a little bit about the subterranean termite itself?
Okay, they have a caste system. First of all,
what's a caste system?
Caste system, you have different castes, different groups, or they'll always remain that at that level. Let's put it that way. It's definitely a caste system. You have workers, you have soldiers, you have winged reproductives. That's the major three castes that we're talking about in subterranean termite. Of course, you have the queen. She lays the eggs, which those grow up into. And since we're speaking of eggs, like you said, you know, they're down in the ground. The eggs will hatch into a nymphal stage, and then it'll eventually become an adult. So it's a type of a gradual metamorphosis.
Okay.
And then when they get to be adults, they're either workers, soldiers, or winged reproductives.
Well, now we've talked about swarming. Which of these castes swarm?
The winged reproductives. And like I said earlier, what has to happen is you have to get a certain number of individuals in that colony before they will actually have enough winged reproductives to take flight. And they do that according to temperature, rainfall, things of that nature, and they usually do it once a year.
What do they look like?
The swimmers on subterraneans have a kind of a dark head and a dark body, so they're a little darker than some of the other ones we're going to be talking about later. They're a smaller type as well. And that's the males and the females, and that's their mating flights, essentially, is what they are. That's what constitutes swarms.
Now, you also mentioned drywood termites.
Yes, we did. Drywoods, the way they get their name is because they nest in the wood. They don't have soil contact at all. It's not necessary for them to construct a colony. So you don't have the females or the queens laying their eggs in the soil. They lay their eggs in the wood.
Do you have shelter tubes?
No, none whatsoever, because here again there's no earth contact.
So they're different than
quite a bit.
subterraneans
They're
like
nesting exclusively in a piece of wood someplace. The males and females, they start on a piece of sound wood, for that matter, and they bore a hole. They have a little nuptial chamber, you call it, and the female will lay their eggs, and the eggs will hatch into nymphal stages, and then the nymphs will gradually grow up, but they nest right in the wood. The other thing about, when we're talking about nymphal stages, we might talk about the caste system of how they do have a caste system, but it differs a bit from subterraneans. The caste systems of drywoods, you have winged reproductives, and then you have the soldiers. but you don't have a worker caste. What performs the work in a drywood colony are the nymphal stages. Now these nymphs will eventually grow up to be soldiers or winged reproductives. But in the drywood circumstance, you have nymphs that are performing most of the work, where in the subterraneans, it's the workers that are performing most of it.
What kind of damage do you see, Dave, with the drywood, with the drywood termite?
Well, you don't see the tubes, like we said before. So what you'll see is if it's in a piece of wood, the galleries will sometimes cut across the grain.
Instead of going with the grain like subterranean.
Exactly. The other things you'll see is you'll see a lot of small pellets. Whereas the fecal matter of the subterraneans is more of a liquid, and they use that to stick those tubes together and form debris inside of the galleries. The drywood termites are very neat and very clean. There's no debris in it. The only thing you have are these little small, almost identical fecal pellets that they deposit and are located within the galleries, or once certain portions of the galleries get too full, they'll actually cut a hole in the wood and push those pellets out and form what we call kick holes, and push those pellets out, and you'll find piles of them like on your floor or on a piece of furniture or someplace like that.
Now we talked about swarmers with the subterraneans.
Right.
What kind of swarmers do you see with drywood termites?
They're larger, and they don't have the black color. They have more of a brownish or reddish brown to a tan color on their head, and then their body's basically a light color, kind of a cream color. So they're a bit larger than the subterranean and much lighter.
Well, what do you do, Dave, if you have drywood termite damage?
Well, first of all, we've got to go back and remember that they nest in the wood, and they're going to be found in certain pieces of wood. So the first thing we want to think about is wood removal, because if we can just remove those pieces of wood that the termites are located in, then we can effectively excavate the colony. Now that's the first step. If it's pretty extensive and it's still going to be expensive to do that, then what we suggest people to do at that point is you can actually inject insecticides into the galleries of drywood termites. And that's a very effective way to control them. And you don't have to get into the real expensive stuff. Now, if it's throughout the entire house, as a very last resort, we suggest that people would tint their house and fumigate it.
So put a tarp over your entire house.
Right. But it's an extremely expensive way to go, and so we use that as a last resort, because there's some other things we can do in between, like wood removal and injecting things into the galleries, actually into the wood, to protect it and kill out those colonies because of their nesting habits.
The third type of termite that you mentioned was damp wood.
Damp woods are actually species of drywood termites.
Oh, so they're very similar then.
Very similar in their habits, biology, things of that nature. So they're actually a type of drywood termite. And by that, see, they're nesting in the wood.
Okay. Rather than having shelter tubes.
Right.
Okay.
They have fecal pellets. They're a little bit larger than the normal drywoods, and they're a little different shape. They're more conical shaped, where the other ones are rounded and blunt-end fecal pellets. The other thing is that they will feed across the grain. So their feeding habits and their other habits are very similar. The caste system is similar.
What do the swarmers look like?
The swarmers are real large.
Big ones.
Big termites, and once you see those, you're going to recognize them immediately, because it's an extremely large, heavy body, fairly long, about close to 1/7 of an inch in length as far as the body's concerned. So they're fairly large swarmers. Then they have a caste system very similar to drywoods, where they have the winged reproductives, and they have the soldiers, and they have no worker caste.
What kind of damage do they cause?
Well, they feed primarily in damp wood, hence the name, damp wood termites, or wood that's been damaged by water, let's put it that way. They will feed in that, but sometimes they will get started there. That's where they will lay their eggs. The queen will lay her eggs initially, but they can go into more sound and healthy wood and move from that water-damaged wood. So look for those areas, sometimes commonly around in bathrooms or in wood that's close to contact to the soil surface.
So if you get rid of the moisture problem, you get rid of the termite problem? Is that right?
Usually that's the case. And also control of these is very similar to drywood termites. You just remove the damaged wood. And also once you do that, you have to pay attention and make sure that it's not re-damaged by water. So if you have leaky faucets or pipes, or things like that, you want to make sure that it doesn't start to process over again. There is another termite that we probably should talk about, and we mentioned it earlier, that is becoming an important pest in the U.S. And it's found basically around the seaport areas. You know, mentioned it in Hawaii and Florida, certain parts in California we're concerned about. It's another subterranean termite, and that's the Formosan.
The Formosan termite?
The Formosan termite, and it's a larger species of termite than any of the ones we've talked about so far. It's kind of a pale yellow. It has maybe kind of a hairy or fuzzy wings. And since it is a subterranean termite, it also has earthen tubes that it constructs. But the reason it's a problem is because it has a voracious appetite. And it'll eat more wood in a given time, or about twice as much wood in a given time than most of the typical subterranean termites that we have now. And so we want to be on a particular close lookout for it. Because it is a potentially harmful pest, and it can destroy a lot of wood in a very short period of time.
We've talked about 3 or 4 different types of termites. Can you tell me a little bit more about their control?
If we're talking about subterraneans, what you have to do in that situation, you have to lay down some kind of chemical or physical barrier between the structure and the soil where the subterraneans are living.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? How do you go about laying those down?
Well, 2 ways. You can either do it before the structure's built, and that's called a pre-treatment. You can do it after the structure's built, and that's called a post-construction treatment for termites. Now, with the pre-treatment, all you do is you lay down a chemical barrier on that area that's prepared before you pour the slab. And that's just all there really is to it.
So that great big cement slab isn't protection enough from the termites?
No, not entirely, because see, if anything splashed on the ground, it's going to crack. You know, it'll crack. You get crack occurs in certain places, and you may be in the middle of your living room or wherever you don't want it, and so they can come up through there. So it's not a total protection. So you have to have something to help out in case you get cracks in that slab that you pour.
So they don't need a very large crack in the slab then?
About 1/64 of an inch is about all they need to get through.
Right?
Real tiny.
Do you need any special safety equipment or anything when you're putting down this kind of an application?
I think rubber boots, I think, is probably one of the, because you're walking over that surface, you know, and of course you need long pants, protective clothing as far as that's concerned. You need other things, rubber gloves and mixing and goggles and, you know, the normal safety equipment that you find in most of your texts that talk about safety equipment.
Okay. And now you mentioned also post-treatments. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Okay, post-treatment is after the house is built and you discover you have termites in it. What happens at that point, you have to come in and rod and trench. You usually rod through the slab and inject material beneath the slab as best you can to try to get a total coverage so that the termites, even if there are cracks or the ways that they are finding to gain access to the structure, are cut off. You form barriers like that.
So that's after you've got your slab down. Sounds like that will be a little bit harder.
It's a little more difficult, yes. Well, quite a bit more difficult, as a matter of fact. The other thing is you also have to trench around the outside because you'll also have tubes that'll come up on the outside of the structure as well.
Oh, those shelter tubes.
Shelter tubes that we were talking about earlier. So not only can they come up into the slab, but you also have to trench or inject material around the outside.
Okay, well, how about an inspection? To know if you've got this kind of a problem, how would you go about inspecting your house to see if you need treatment?
Okay, there's certain things you can do. First, I think you need to evaluate your area and see if you have conditions that are conducive for termites. That probably leads into an inspection. And what we call conditions conducive are things like excessive moisture, earth to wood contact. Anytime wood's contacting the earth, you just don't want that to occur. Faulty grade. Now, faulty grade is where your lawn is sloping towards your house instead of away. That's essentially what that means. Excessive moisture, I think I mentioned that earlier, but things like that that can create a great habitat or entrance for termites into the structure. So once you understand what conditions conducive are, then you go through an inspection process, and there's certain things you're going to need, like a flashlight. You're going to need to look inside and outside the house. You're going to need to look in crevices, and you also need to look in the attic. You have to inspect that.
Oh, they'll get up in the attic too.
You can find damage there. You can find earthen tubes up there as well. They can gain access to it. They'll eventually work their way up.
So it's not just baseboards and things like that you want to be looking at.
Right, right. And then you also have to do a little probing, you know, something like a screwdriver, ice pick, something like that, where you actually probe on the wood to see if there are any galleries beneath and see how solid the surface of the wood it actually is. Another type of insect that will feed on wood, and which can consider to be a wood-destroying organism, are the group of beetles. And that's the largest group of insects in the world. There's about 600,000 species of beetles. They don't all feed on wood,
Uh-huh.
but there are a group of beetles that are classified as wood-destroying organisms. As you can see here, when walking along a log like this, you see a lot of exit holes, different shapes, different sizes. Some of what you need to think about is most of these holes are exit holes. That's where they have come out. So they have completed their larval development inside that piece of dead wood, and then they're coming out, and that's the adults usually come out of those holes. You can also see a lot of rotting here too, which is something else that goes along with it. Well, since this looks like fairly rotted, maybe we could to do some digging in here, open this up and see if we couldn't find some of the larval forms of the beetles.
Sounds
because
good.
you know, beetles, they go through a complete type metamorphosis. They have the egg, larval, pupa, and adult stage. So maybe we can find some larval stages down inside of some of these. If we begin to look here, I don't know, we can get and pry this snap out of here.
Oh yeah, Dave, there you go.
Look at this one. This is a round-headed boar.
This is a beetle?
Yeah, this is the larval stage of a what we call a longhorn wood-boring beetle. It's a see, it has a completely round head, and it makes the round holes. Pick up that piece of wood there and hand it to me. We can see some of these round holes that it makes in the wood, like that one right there. See that? That's a perfect hole that they make there in the wood, and it's round. There may be some other critters down in here someplace. Oh, look here.
Look
here.
right down in there.
Look here. See where we can dig this out to this other. Right.
Ooh, biting on it.
You grab a hold of it. He didn't like me poking on him with that. There we go. There's a good one. That's a good round-headed boar, we call it. The thing we need to think about when we talk about beetles is there are certain beetles that reinfest wood that's in the home, and then there's other types of boars that do not. So as an example, if you were to cut this log, this is not in a good enough condition to cut, but if a piece of wood was cut to lumber, and these larvae were inside that lumber when you built it into the house, they would continue to develop and eventually come out as an adult. But when they do, the adults would not reinfest any wood in the house. And so these, the round-headed boars and another group of what we call flat-headed wood boars, do not reinfest wood in the home. As a matter of fact, they're just found in wood like this, and then once they come out, they go back in search of dead wood, and it usually has to have bark on it or some kind of crack or be in this kind of condition, and you don't find wood in your house that's in this kind of condition, you know, with all the decaying that's going on
But
here.
once they come out, then there's no point in treating for them because they're just going to go on. They're not going to come back.
Absolutely right. There's no point in treating them at all because it's just a waste of time and money, and there's just not anything else that's they're not going to be that much of a problem. Now there's another type, and I've got a piece of wood down here that probably would show this better than anything we know of, and they're called flat-headed wood borers, and they make the larval stage of the flathead wood borers makes a flat tunnel. It's not round like these made we just looked at here. It's a flat tunnel, and it's usually just beneath the bark. And you can see right here.
That's right.
Where it runs right beneath the bark, like this. And there's a lot of frass that's piled in behind it. Frass, that's the excrement, you know, the wood, what's leavings of it, so to speak. But anyway, to make the key of it is it makes these flat holes, and it's called a flat-headed wood borer in the larval stage. In the adult stage, it's called a metallic wood borer. And the reason they call them metallic beetles is because they are metallic and real shiny, different colors, kind of a bullet shape. They really don't have antennae. Or they have them, but you can't see them very well.
Now, Dave, there are reinfesting and non-reinfesting beetles, and we just finished talking about the non-reinfesting beetles. They don't go back in and destroy your wood. But there are also reinfesting beetles, and I understand they're very damaging to wood and wood products.
Yes, that's correct. There are several different species of beetles that are damaging to wood in the home. Two of them that come to mind right now, one of them is the true powder post beetle, and the other one's the death watch beetle. The true powder post beetle is found primarily exclusively in hardwood. The death watch is also found in homes as well, and it is a reinfesting type, usually found in older homes, older wood, things of that nature. Well, Gary, the other thing we were talking about, you know, we talked about termites and we talked about beetles. There's another wood-destroying organism that sometimes can be a pest. I don't really call it a major pest, but you see it quite often. And those are carpenter ants.
Are those different than regular ants?
Quite a bit different in the fact that they nest in wood. You know, typical ants nest in the ground, they excavate the ground and carry particles of soil out. These ants, they don't eat it. What they do is they nest in the wood. They use the wood as a nesting area, and they excavate it out, particularly where the wood is soft. They'll make galleries there in the wood. Also, they'll occupy other galleries that may have been made by termites previously in that wood, areas like that. But they don't eat it, they just tear chunks of it off and bring it out. And if they were in a home, like in a piece of lumber or something, or 2x4 or something like that, if they tore those chunks of wood out, they'd push them out, and they have a kick hole where they push little chunks of wood out. Oh. And it looks like enlarged pieces of sawdust.
So they have clean galleries then, or clean holes? Or
extremely clean, yes, extremely. They keep them very, very clean, and all the debris is pushed out constantly. It would remind you of a drywood termite colony because of the way they're kept so clean, except they don't have the pellets like drywoods do. But the carpenter ants keep a very clean colony. They don't eat wood, they just excavate it. So they can be a problem in certain parts of the house. But it's really not that big of a pest. Depends on what part of the country you live in. You can get it worse in other parts than others. The treatment for these is usually a local treatment. You try to eliminate the colony. Typically these carpenter ants, and there's something else I needed to mention, is that when they're in a house, since they're not feeding on wood, people say, well, what do they feed on? What they do is they come to the kitchen and they feed on breadcrumbs and sugar, things like that that's left out on the counter. They're in the cracks and crevices in your cupboards in the kitchen shelf. And they feed on that at night when it's dark, carrying the stuff back and forth to their homes, wherever the home is happen to be in that house. And they carry that back, and that's how they feed their colonies, feed their young. Well, Gary, we've talked about carpenter ants in this area like this. The next thing that comes into mind, since we're talking about carpenter ants, is carpenter bees.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, fits in the same category almost. Carpenter bees are large black bees. They resemble bumblebees. They nest in wood, and they nest in dead wood like you see here, softwood, trees, things of that nature. They make a hole about the size of a dime up to a nickel. It's perfectly round. They use that as a nesting site. They just excavate the wood out, go down to the bottom, and they make a little nest or a little area to raise their young. What happens, the bees visit flowers and they gather pollen and nectar. They don't make honey, but they actually go down and they feed that nectar and pollen to their young in the bottom of those galleries in the wood. Some people see them in wood and they get a little bit concerned, or they see them flying around. They're in their firewood, sometimes can be an old fence post. Generally a softwood is what they like. But they are sometimes classified as a wood-destroying organism, but they're not a major pest. We've talked about all the different insects that are classified as wood-destroying organisms. One of the other ones that we have to talk about that's really not an insect, it's various types of fungi. And there's different types of fungi. There's the white, basically two groups. There's white and brown. The white can be a stringy type fungi. And the brown is sometimes called brown cubicle rot. And I think most people consider the brown cubicle rot to be probably the most damaging as far as wood and particularly in homes and structures are concerned. Here we have an example of brown cubicle rot, and you can see why it's called that. Because when you flake this off, you see how it stays in this square or cubicle conformation. It looks, you see how it looks? Just break that. So hence the name, and you see the color, it's brown. That's real clever, isn't it? It's called
Even
brown.
I can figure that
You can figure that. It's called brown cubicle rot. And I guess, like I said, it's probably considered to be one of the most damaged because I think you don't get near the structural damage from the white rots as you do the brown. The thing you need to remember about this is that none of these rots would be here unless moisture was there first.
Back to conducive conditions again.
Exactly. And you've heard the term dry rot?
Yeah.
There really is there's no such thing as dry rot because by the time we see it, it may be dry. But in order to get to that rotting condition, it had to have been wet at one time or another. And when it's wet, that's when the fungi has a chance to develop. It breaks down all the tissue. So then we come along and see it and we call it dry rot.
So if you've got a problem with it, again, it comes back to it's a moisture condition problem. Just take care of your moisture problem.
Absolutely. You know, like around bathrooms, and you see baseboards that have that rotting type condition. What you do is you eliminate the moisture, and then you can stop it.
Well, Dave, can you review for me, please, on how we did get from here to there?
Well, I hope we've covered all the different things like termites and beetles and things like that we were supposed to talk about, but in order to get from here to something like this over here behind us, this has to die first.
Okay.
And is killed by natural causes or whatever, but it dies, and then the larger organisms like the termites and the beetles and the things we talk about must start the degradation process. Once they start that, they provide route of entry for moisture, which then, as we know, moisture allowed the fungi to begin. The fungi then continues to break this down so it can be incorporated back into the soil.
So in nature, you would really consider these to be beneficial organisms because they break down wood that would just be laying on the forest floor.
Exactly.
I suppose if you had them in your house, you would maybe want to contact a professional.
I think it'd be a real good idea.
Probably so. Well, Dave, thank you very much. I really appreciate your help.
Glad to do it.
We hope that this has helped you to be able to better identify the various common wood-destroying organisms. With the University of Arizona, I'm Gary Kramer. Thank you.